Storm Ashley, bringing some rain and also those strengthening winds. And it's going to be windy everywhere on Sunday with widespread gales. The strongest winds more towards the northwest of the UK. This is where we're more likely to have some travel disruption and maybe some damage as well. But we've got the rain in the morning. That's going to sweep its way eastwards. May not be too much rain in the southeast of England. Following the rain, a window of dry weather before those squally showers near the storm pack in towards the northwest. Another mild day, but that's not the main story. The strength of the wind is the story, and the wind's really picking up very quickly through the Irish Sea, pushing in those very strong winds across Scotland and Northern Ireland. The core of strongest winds is shown here by this amber wind warning from the Met Office in Western Scotland, and combined with some high tides, may well be some coastal flooding as well. The wind's still gusting 60 miles an hour in northern Scotland on Monday, but as the storm moves away, the weather turns quieter.
Join Sumi, Cathy and Katrina as they cut through the noise and distraction of the US election.
It feels like we're in the home stretch now.
With precision.
You know, the US carries such weight on the global stage.
Independence.
On the economy, on crime, on immigration.
And no agenda.
It's the first time that I've been using words like friendly, cordial, amicable in a very long time in US politics.
We're at that stage of the campaign where they're really kind of slicing and dicing the electorate.
Path to the presidency. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
This programme asks plain questions with the help of the unrivalled range of BBC journalists right across the world. And gathered here in this building, I'll also draw on my time reporting on global conflict. Frontline experience that helps me know who to talk to and who to listen to, meaning our analysis is unbiased with absolutely no spin.
Unspun World. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Israel's Prime Minister holds a special security meeting after the killing of the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. US President Joe Biden is honoured with Germany's highest Order of Merit by President Frank-Walter Steinmeier at a ceremony in Berlin. King Charles lands in Sydney to begin his biggest overseas trip since his cancer diagnosis in February. Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh and welcome to BBC News Now, 3 hours of fast-moving news, interviews and reaction. A security meeting in Tel Aviv led by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after the killing of the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar was to focus, according to reports, on progress towards a hostage release deal. Sinwar's death raises questions about who will direct Hamas now and how the militant organisation will react. We'll get the thoughts of someone who's previously interviewed Yahya Sinwar. There's also the issue of the remaining hostages held in Gaza, with the man who Israel saw as the architect of the October the 7th attacks now dead. Is it time for the military action to be downgraded and the efforts to bring the hostages home stepped up? We'll talk live to a relative of one of the people kidnapped last October. And with the conflict having the potential to widen further, we'll ask what the death of Yahya Sinwar means for the fighting across the region and for the humanitarian situation in Gaza. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the very latest developments across the Middle East. And Israeli media is reporting that Benjamin Netanyahu is chairing a security meeting on Friday following the killing of Yahya Sinwar, something which he described as the beginning of the end of the war in Gaza. Those reports suggest the gathering will focus on possible progress in hostage deal negotiations. And more details have emerged of how Yahya Sinwar's body was identified before being moved to an Israeli forensic centre. He was killed with other members of Hamas in fighting on Wednesday, but the bodies were only inspected by the Israel Defense Forces the next day when the resemblance of one of them to Sinwar was noticed. Because of suspected booby traps in the area, the body wasn't moved. Instead, part of a finger was removed and sent to Israel for testing, which confirmed it was the Hamas leader. The Israeli military has also released drone footage, which it says shows some of the final moments of Yahya Sinwar's life. He's shown here sitting in a chair in a damaged building. It says he was found with a gun and the equivalent of more than $10,000 of Israeli currency. There have been more protests in Israel calling on the government to use this moment to bring the remaining hostages home. And in Gaza, there's been no end to the conflict. There have been reports of more explosions across the territory, particularly in the north, and pictures have shown several wounded people being taken to hospitals in Gaza City. The Israeli military has also released this video showing armoured vehicles at a muster point near northern Gaza being ready to enter the Palestinian territory. Well, President Biden is currently in Germany meeting the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. We'll have more on that later in this programme. But in the last few minutes, he spoke about the death of Yahya Sinwar.
The death of the leader of Hamas represents a moment of justice. He had the blood of Americans and Israelis, Palestinians and Germans and so many others on his hands. I told the Prime Minister of Israel yesterday, let's also make this moment an opportunity to seek a path to peace, a better future in Gaza without Hamas. And I look forward to discussing Iran. Olaf and I spoke the morning after Iran launched 200 ballistic missiles at Israel earlier this month. With our G7 counterparts, we agreed to coordinate our response through sanctions and other measures. And that is what we have done. I'm grateful for Germany's cooperation in holding Iran accountable for destabilizing policies, including providing missiles and drones to Russia to use against Ukraine. And just this week, the European Union followed Germany, the UK, and France in sanctioning Iran's leading airlines. This followed our own oil sanctions. This coordination is going to have to continue.
Well, let's speak now to our correspondent in Jerusalem, Jonah Fisher. Jonah, hello to you. So President Biden and other world leaders talking about this moment being an opportunity for perhaps ceasefire negotiations to get underway properly again, to lead to some end to this conflict. But we don't know, of course, exactly what Benjamin Netanyahu is thinking at the moment, do we?
Well, we have a pretty good idea from his immediate reaction last night to the killing of Yahya Sinwar. There was celebrations in parts of Israel. I was in northern Israel, in Tiberias, on the banks of the Sea of Galilee, and people came out onto the streets waving flags, singing and celebrating that death. And you heard, you mentioned earlier, the hostages, the families of the hostages. They have also come out today hoping that this might be a pivotal moment, a changing moment, if you could put it that way, in what happens to them. They've talked that they hope that there might be leverage in terms of bringing those hostages which were taken on October the 7th, more than a year ago, bringing them back home. But yeah, we believe that meetings are taking place today. The Prime Minister Netanyahu is meeting with his security chiefs, talking through the options, thinking about what happens next. But in terms of what Prime Minister Netanyahu said last night, it seems that he is not thinking of this as an off-ramp, a moment to potentially declare that Israel has achieved its aims. Instead, very much the emphasis was on continuing the war, that there were still objectives which Israel wanted to achieve, not just in Gaza but elsewhere. We know, for example, this morning in South Lebanon that the Israeli military has called on 20 villages to be evacuated to pave the way, one would expect, for Israeli military activity in those areas. So I think there is a sense that though this is a moment of success for the Israeli military, that this is not the moment to ease off, that they want to press home from the successes they've been having.
Yet it's difficult to reconcile, isn't it, Jonah, those comments from Prime Minister Netanyahu saying the war goes on with, apparently, according to reports, one of the focus points for this security meeting, a discussion apparently on how to get the hostages released. The two things don't seem to necessarily go together, do they?
That is a constant pressure on the Israeli government here to be seen to be trying to make progress in terms of what happens to those hostages. But the sense one gets, and I think we'll have to see what comes out of this meeting, obviously, is that, well, this may be a moment in which perhaps people think that things might be shaken up a little. There might be a change in dynamic. We don't know, of course, yet who will replace Yahya Sinwar as the leader of Hamas in Gaza. So the hostage families are trying to seek this moment, if you like, to refocus attention on them. The indications at the moment are that Prime Minister Netanyahu is still thinking about military objectives, both in terms of Gaza and in Lebanon.
OK, Jonah, thank you very much. Jonah Fisher in Jerusalem. Well, in the past few minutes, a senior Hamas official has said the Palestinian militant group cannot be eliminated with the killing of its leaders, but stopped short of confirming Yahya Sinwar's death. The news agency AFP quotes Bassem Naim, a senior member of Hamas's political bureau, as saying Hamas is a liberation movement led by people looking for freedom and dignity, and this cannot be eliminated. Well, joining me now is the journalist Francesca Borri, who has interviewed Yahya Sinwar and other members of Hamas. Thank you very much, Francesca, for your time today. You've met Yahya Sinwar in person. What were your impressions of him?
He was somehow, an average man with a blue shirt or a grey shirt. He was remarkable, because he was unremarkable. And he was totally shaped by the life he lived. This is what he told me, you are Italian, you're European, so you decide, your life, the life you want to live. I'm Palestinian, I'm from Gaza, and so it's my life that decides me, decides who I am, who I will be, And he was absolutely determined to get the end of the occupation, the end of the siege of Gaza. He got the end of Gaza, actually. But still, I think he died the way he wished to die, fighting. And now is, if you just look, online at what, young Arabs, young Palestinians are saying, it's like the new Che Guevara of the Middle East.
I know when you talked to him, there were huge security precautions taken by him and the people around him, no electronic devices allowed to be brought in by you, for example. So were you surprised to learn of the circumstances in which he died, given that extreme care which he took, which the people around him took with his security?
No, at all. I think the turning point was for this war, and for much more than this war, the turning point was the death of Hassan Nasrallah, because with the death of Hassan Nasrallah was clear, beyond any doubt, that basically Hezbollah or Iran, no one was going to join the war and, support somehow, Hamas. And I think that at that moment, Yahya Sinwar decided to get out of the tunnels. I don't think, that he was out of the tunnels for, 1 year, basically, since October 7th. At that point, he realized, that it was over. And he decided, to die in that way, which is actually what we are also witnesses, in the West Bank in the last weeks, so many young leaders of the, armed groups in Jenin, in Tulkarem, in Nablus, they are fighting in this way, under the drones. And really, I would say, fearless, but also careless, they are definitely looking for, they want to be martyrs, there is...
So tell us more, just picking up on that, Francesca, based on your knowledge of Hamas, talking to members of Hamas, what do you think the group will do now? Who might replace Yahya Sinwar? And will it make Hamas, either through choice or circumstance, more or less open to the idea of some sort of hostage exchange?
The hostages, unfortunately, I don't think Hamas knows exactly where they are. And I don't think some of the corpses will never be found. Hamas is over. The Hamas, Hamas as we know it, is over. Politically, is in total disarray. The new leader might be Khaled Mashal, one of the founders of Hamas. And
so a military organization rather than a political organization, is that what you're saying?
Less than that, because also militarily, of course, the chains of command and everything, there was a huge blow. But, Hamas is not an army, well, Bassem Naim was right, is a national liberation movement, which means that, to turn Gaza into a little Iraq, into a little Afghanistan, and to turn Gaza into hell for the IDF, you don't need to be, well organized, well equipped, and well trained. You just need to have gunmen around, not necessarily, under a Hamas flag. So Hamas is over, absolutely, but the idea of Hamas is not over, of course, because until you will have the conflict, until you will have the occupation, you will have some kind of reaction, some kind of resistance, And I think, the main question is not what changed for Hamas. For Hamas, nothing changed, with the death of Sinwar. Really nothing. I know that in the West might be a little bit hard to understand. Nothing changed. What really changed, well, all changed for Netanyahu. So now Netanyahu, what is going to do with Gaza? No, now he needs more troops on the ground. He didn't expect to kill Sinwar in that way. Somehow Sinwar was killed inadvertently. Not like Ismail Haniyeh. Israel decided the day, decided the place.
Francesca, we are out of time, I'm afraid, but thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on that. Francesca Borri, a journalist who has interviewed Yahya Sinwar, other members of Hamas as well. Just a reminder, we have a live page running online with the latest reaction from across the Middle East to the Hamas leader's death. You can find that on the BBC News website and app. And let's turn now to the hostages being held in Gaza. They were taken in the Hamas attack on Israel on the 7th of October. According to Israel, 251 Israelis and foreigners were taken on that day. Some have been released, others rescued, and some have been killed. A total of 97 remain unaccounted for. Hamas has not given any figures as to how many of that number are still alive. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in September that intelligence suggests half of the total, a little under 50 people, remain alive. Well, let's speak now to Steve Brisley. Steve's sister and two nieces were killed in the Hamas attacks of October the 7th last year. Steve's brother-in-law, Eli, is still being held hostage in Gaza. And Steve, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today. And this must be a moment when you're wondering what the ripple effect will be of Yahya Sinwar's death, what that means for the hostages, for your brother-in-law.
Absolutely. Anytime there's been a major event in the whole Middle East conflict in the last 12 months, I look at it as to how that's going to affect my brother-in-law, Eli, and the hostages. It's not for me about wider geopolitical issues. It's about family. It's about my loved ones. So none of us are shedding any tears for Sinwar, but until we get our family members back, our nightmare continues. So I don't celebrate Sinwar's death. I draw no comfort from it. I'm glad that he's gone, but I will celebrate when my brother-in-law Eli and all the other hostages walk to freedom alive.
We've just shown a picture of Eli. Tell us about him. What is he like?
He's an incredibly intelligent man. He's a mathematician, a great mathematical brain and businessman. But more importantly, he's a family man. I mean, my sister Leanne always used to, sort of tell him off for coming home when he came home late from work to go up and have a cuddle and a chat with the girls when she got him settled. But that was Ellie, because his family is everything to him. And he's just also a very funny man. He's a Man United fan. I'm a Liverpool fan. We argue about football and have banter about that. And when he laughs with his whole body. His face scrunches up, his shoulders shake, and I look forward to seeing and hearing that laugh again.
What are you hoping for at this point from Benjamin Netanyahu? A former BBC Middle East correspondent told my colleagues on BBC Radio earlier today that Benjamin Netanyahu is, in his view, in full war mode at this moment. What would you say to Prime Minister Netanyahu in terms of his efforts to get the hostages back?
The word opportunity has been used a lot by Biden, by Kamala Harris, by many others. I think this is more than an opportunity. This is a watershed moment for getting the hostages home alive. A deal has to be done. We have to turn what is a military achievement into a political, diplomatic achievement of getting a deal to get all of the hostages home alive. In his statement, Netanyahu has referred to the return of our loved ones as being his supreme obligation. It's time for him now to deliver on that obligation. He's also said that the hostages are his loved ones as well as ours. Well, that's encouraging for me to hear, because Netanyahu is a family man, and so his next actions speak directly to his commitment to his family and to my family. So I call upon the Israeli government, upon the UK government, to all stakeholders around the world to speak with one voice and to speak to Israel and to Hamas and use all levers they can to get the hostages home.
Stephen, appreciate you talking to us. Stephen Brisley, who is hoping to be reunited with his brother-in-law, Ellie. Now, President Biden is making what could be his last overseas visit. We'll look at what he's hoping to achieve in Berlin, around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News. Now, more on the news that President Joe Biden is making what could be his last overseas trip as US president, a one-day visit to Berlin. He's fitting plenty in, including being honoured with Germany's Order of Merit Award. He'll also hold talks with the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. Those discussions going on right now still, I think. And the French and British leaders, Emmanuel Macron and Sir Keir Starmer, the latter two making special trips to Berlin to take part. Well, let's speak now to our correspondent in Berlin, Jessica Parker. Jessica, hello to you. So a day of ceremony, a day for political discussions as well. We'll talk about the latter first of all, because we heard those comments from President Biden on the death of Yahya Sinwar. So obviously the Middle East on his agenda, Ukraine always as well. As he comes to the end of his presidency, what more progress is he hoping to make on some of those big issues?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think if we break it down a little bit, clearly on Ukraine, President Zelensky recently presented what he called his victory plan to President Joe Biden and two other Western leaders. as well. And some of the big asks on that, an invitation to join NATO, permission to use Western-made long-range missiles on military targets inside Russia, that hasn't been, as of yet, forthcoming. And I think Kyiv, I was there a couple of weeks ago, were really hoping that Joe Biden would use this moment as he comes to the end of his presidency to make big decisions like that. Now, there is still time, but no indication yet that that is going to happen. What he seems to be doing in Berlin, amongst a number of things, but particular on Ukraine, I was just looking at some of his remarks. He was saying that countries who've been supporting Ukraine must sustain our resolve and support. The cost is heavy, but pales in comparison to the alternatives. And he actually picked up particularly on German defence spending and said that Germany must keep up the 2% NATO defence spending target of GDP because it matters, he said. And that is interesting because Germany only just this year got to that 2% spending target after decades of not meeting it. There isn't a long-term plan at the moment in Berlin as to how they are going to sustain that. So I think President Joe Biden, with an eye on who may succeed him in the White House, particularly the possibility of another Donald Trump presidency, is saying to European partners, including Germany, which is, of course, Europe's biggest economy, that they must sustain not just support for Ukraine, but bolstering their own defences as he leaves office. But I'm sure you noticed as well in Berlin, and as the President Frank-Walter Steinmeier paid tribute to Joe Biden, there was a lot of love in the room for the outgoing US president, because here in Berlin, I think those in the sort of political establishment really feel he reset relations after the last Donald Trump presidency.
Yes, just very briefly, Jess, that ceremony, all part of this legacy building for President Biden.
Yeah, I think so. And that is partly about Ukraine, trying to ensure that whoever does succeed in the White House, that there will be sustained support for Kyiv after he leaves. But I think, he seemed kind of quite touched, I think, by some of the tributes paid to him and the suggestions from Frank-Walter Steinmeier that he had really revived that transatlantic partnership after the Donald Trump years. But of course, whatever comes next, that is up to the US electorate, while capitals like Berlin and others in Europe will watch on closely.
We'll be talking about the US elections very shortly. But to you in Berlin, Jessica Parker, thank you very much. Meanwhile, here in the UK, the BBC has learned that the government is planning to increase the amount of money it raises from inheritance tax at the budget. It's not known how many people are likely to end up paying more, nor how much more they would pay. Inheritance tax is charged at 40% on the property, money and possessions of someone who has died above the £325,000 threshold. It raises about £7 billion a year for the government. Around 4% of deaths result in an inheritance tax charge. Our political correspondent Ben Wright has more.
We've learned that the Chancellor plans to raise more money via inheritance tax. And I don't think it's a big surprise, frankly, because the government, well, Labour in its manifesto, ruled out raising the three big taxes that could provide it with very useful revenue: VAT, income tax, national insurance, although, of course, there is a question mark over the employer's contribution, national insurance element to that, and whether or not that's something the Chancellor is going to do. Strong hints she will change that. But therefore, she's left looking at other smaller taxes to try and raise money. And we know that she needs billions of pounds extra a year to try and balance the books and avoid austerity, which is her stated aim with this budget. So this complex tax, which raises and stirs up strong emotions, both by proponents of inheritance tax and opponents of it, is going to be looked at. But we don't know yet which of the reliefs and allowances she may be tempted to tinker with. But there is the potential, clearly, to raise quite a bit more money. As you say, at the moment, the Treasury receives about £7 billion a year through inheritance tax. That's a tiny amount, really, considering the £800 billion of tax revenue the Treasury gets every year. Fewer than 1 in 20 estates at the moment pay inheritance tax. So at a time when many assets are rising in value, in particular houses, of course, and there is a big generational transfer of wealth underway from the baby boomers to their children and grandchildren, you can see why people in the Treasury think this could be a good source of money to try and tap. But it will be controversial.
Ben Wright reporting. A new line coming into us from the Middle East. The Israeli military saying it is calling up an additional reserve brigade for operational missions in northern Israel. That's all we have on that at the moment. But I'll be talking about the situation in the Middle East with our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, in just a few minutes' time. So do stay with us here on BBC News.
Hello there. This weekend sees the first named storm of the season. It's been named by the Irish Met Service. And at the moment, Storm Ashley is a long way away over the other side of the Atlantic and yet to develop from that area of cloud. In advance of that, we've got this deep low running to the northwest of the UK, pushing in this cloud, bringing some rain and some stronger winds. But we still have mild air this afternoon. Temperatures are going to reach 16 or 17 degrees. The mist and low cloud and fog that we've had through the Midlands and eastern England slowly lifting as the breeze picks up. The stronger winds are in the west, where we've got the cloud and this rain. This first bit of rain really won't amount to very much. The second band of rain is going to be heavier, and as the winds fall lighter overnight, that rain is going to slow down as it moves into England and Wales. Clearer skies do follow into the west, and temperatures in Scotland and Northern Ireland down to 8 or 9 degrees, but milder elsewhere. Change of fortunes though for tomorrow, because it's going to be eastern England this time that sees the rain in the morning. Should tend to clear away, but may linger in the southeast into the afternoon. Otherwise, sunshine follows on behind and many places will be dry. Just a few showers, mainly towards the northwest of Scotland. Temperatures very similar to today. The winds fairly light, so all in all a decent looking day for many, and certainly the better day of the weekend, because Sunday sees the arrival of this deepening area of low pressure. This is Storm Ashley, bringing some rain and also those strengthening winds. And it's going to be windy everywhere on Sunday with widespread gales. The strongest winds more towards the northwest of the UK. This is where we're more likely to have some travel disruption and maybe some damage as well. But we've got the rain in the morning. That's going to sweep its way eastwards. May not be too much rain in the southeast of England. Following the rain, a window of dry weather before those squally showers near the storm pack in towards the northwest. Another mild day, but that's not the main story. The strength of the wind is the story, and the wind's really picking up very quickly through the Irish Sea, pushing in those very strong winds across Scotland and Northern Ireland. The core of strongest winds is shown here by this amber wind warning from the Met Office in Western Scotland, and combined with some high tides, may well be some coastal flooding as well. The wind's still gusting 60 miles an hour in northern Scotland on Monday, but as the storm moves away, the weather turns quieter.
The 2024 US election looks set to be one of the most extraordinary yet. Could there be further shocks ahead in this historic race to the White House? Get the latest headlines in the BBC News app. Get in-depth coverage on bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story of the US election on BBC News.
When the weather can't make up its mind, we can help you make up yours. Check on the BBC Weather app.
Today we're looking at the state of British politics.
Asking, is technology ruining football?
Are we too obsessed with our phones?
Helen from Hull wants to know, how hot's the planet going to get?
And we'll explain why prices keep going up and up.
Also, Rach, did you know space has its own smell?
Really? What of? The world is fast-moving and can be confusing.
So let's talk about it.
5 Live Breakfast with Rachel and Rick. Listen on BBC Sounds.
This is BBC News. The headlines for you. In its first statement since the killing of the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, an official from the group insists it's becoming stronger. US President Joe Biden is honoured with Germany's highest Order of Merit by President Frank-Walter Steinmeier at a ceremony in Berlin. And King Charles lands in Sydney to begin his biggest overseas trip since his cancer diagnosis in February. Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh. Let's turn now to the US presidential election and the race for the White House. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump have been trading insults at stops along the campaign trail ahead of the November 5th vote. Mr. Trump did so at an annual Catholic charity dinner in New York, where presidential candidates traditionally roast each other lightheartedly. Ms. Harris skipped the event, but did submit a video, instead delivering her attacks while campaigning in Wisconsin. Well, let's go live now to CBS News correspondent Jared Hill, who's in New York. Hello to you, Jared. So Donald Trump at the event, Kamala Harris not there in person. As we say, she submitted a video. What does that say that she and her campaign team feel it was more important for her to be out on the road?
That might be the thing right there, is that there's the potential here that the Harris campaign is just making the decision, looking at the numbers, looking at the calculus, and saying that it's more important to be in one of these battleground states. Wisconsin is where she was instead of appearing in person at this charity fundraiser, this charity dinner that is a tradition for political candidates to go to, although there have been times over the past couple of decades where we have seen that not be the case. But again, it was something that ended up coming up here. We know that Wisconsin is, again, one of those states that she's really hoping to lock in as she and former President Trump try and carve their way through the states, in particular those battleground states, to get to 270 votes to win the White House. Trading the campaign trail for a charity roast.
Really a pleasure. Anywhere in New York without a subpoena for my appearance.
Former President Donald Trump took swipes at himself Thursday night, while also taking aim at Vice President Kamala Harris during the white tie dinner for Catholic charities. A tradition for presidential candidates, but the vice president opted not to attend.
My opponent feels like she does not have to be here, which is deeply disrespectful.
Harris instead sent this video with actress Molly Shannon as her classic Catholic schoolgirl character.
Is there anything that you think that maybe I shouldn't bring up tonight?
Well, don't lie. Thou shalt not bear false witness to thy neighbor.
Indeed, especially thy neighbor's election results.
At a stop in Wisconsin, Harris tossed a few barbs at Trump, mocking his statement that he's the father of IVF.
What does that even mean?
Earlier, Trump visited a barbershop in the Bronx while his running mate, J.D. Vance, campaigned in Pennsylvania. Harris's VP pick, Tim Walz, joined former President Bill Clinton in North Carolina on the first day of early voting.
And Jared, well, all the other states don't seem to be getting much attention, do they? Because we are constantly talking about those swing states for a reason, both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris in Michigan today. How tight is the race in that state?
Michigan is also one of those states that's really tight. And again, another one of those 7 battleground states here. And it's a place that also has significance outside of just the state vote itself, but kind of who this represents. We're talking about what's considered the Rust Belt here in the U.S. Some of these more industrial, more manufacturing-based states. And some of the voters and the groups in a state like Michigan could also play in states like Pennsylvania, which, as we know, is going to be a really crucial one here. And so we are seeing both of these candidates really trying to either lock in some of the votes in a state that is traditionally Democrat, but that former President Trump has won in the past, as well as winning over some of the blue-collar folks, the union members in those states as well.
Okay, Jared, thank you very much. Jared Hill in New York. And new US election polls are arriving every day, each one with its own particular take on the figures. We've been pulling together the overall trends rather than the individual points. And you can see at the moment in the national polling that Kamala Harris is on 49 points, 3 points ahead of Donald Trump on 46. And that difference is within the margin of error. And there's been little shift in that, though, over recent weeks. If we turn to those battleground states, those are the ones that either candidate could win and will likely be decisive in this election, all are still within the margin of error, and the shifts are really very small. So on that basis, you can see that Kamala Harris is ahead in 4, Donald Trump in 3. But they are moving towards Trump. His leads in Arizona and Georgia are pushing 2 points up on a few weeks ago, and Harris's leads have been fading just a touch in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. And don't forget, each day in the run-up to the election, we have a live page online with the very latest from the campaign trail. You can find that on the BBC News website or, of course, on the app. Let's return now to our lead story today. And a senior Hamas official has given the group's first response to the killing of its leader, Yahya Sinwar, saying it's becoming stronger and more popular. In a statement, Bassem Naim, who's a member of Hamas's political bureau, didn't directly confirm Mr. Sinwar's death. But he said Israel was mistaken in its belief that killing the group's leader would mean the end of the movement and the struggle of Palestinian people. In Israel, people have been digesting the news that Sinwar is dead and what that might mean. Here's the view of some locals in Jerusalem.
I hope it's going to bring peace as soon as possible and quiet and not a war. And it should be stopped the way the war should stop. And I hope it's going to be a positive stage for the state of Israel.
Of course, for Israel, it's a big step. Maybe the first step to end this war. Of course, as Netanyahu said, as long as they give up and stop and return the hostages.
Look, I think this is genuinely good news. I think twice over. First of all, because he was an evil man, and 45,000 people are dead because of him. Not just the people who were killed on October 7th, but the death of the Palestinians in Gaza is ultimately his fault. And I think, secondly, I think like many people here, I hope that this now makes it easier to end this in some way. I think there is a real desire to get the hostages out, and I think there has to be some way of slowing this down or stopping it.
And let's take a moment to compare those thoughts to the opinions expressed by people in a camp for displaced people in Gaza.
We pray to God that this genocide will end. They always said they wanted to eliminate Sinwar to stop this war. Now that Sinwar has been killed, we hope that the war will stop. They now have no reason to continue this genocide.
We always thought that when this moment arrived, the war would end and our lives would return to normal. But unfortunately, the reality on the ground is quite the opposite. The war hasn't stopped, and the killings continue.
We were shocked by this news because he had the solutions for Gaza and also had the power to stop the war. But Yahya Sinwar's death means destruction for the Gaza Strip.
And joining me now is our Chief International Correspondent, Lise Doucette, who has recently returned from the region. Lise, good to have you in the studio for your analysis of what's happening here. Really interesting to hear those opinions from people in Gaza, people in Jerusalem as well. Looking at that statement, which is pretty fresh to us here, this statement from a senior Hamas official saying that Hamas is stronger, becoming stronger and more popular. Well, Hamas, many people will think, would want to say that after Sinwar's death. Leaders have always been replaced as they've been killed or died. But do you think the death of Sinwar is different?
Yes, the statement by Bassem Naim, who's a member of the political bureau, is the first official. It is the first recognition by Hamas that they've lost a leader, but they didn't, in that statement that he put out, just in text, he never mentioned the name of Yahya Sinwar, as if it's too sacrilegious to even say his name. But the whole point of it was to say our movement is not about a leader. Our movement is about the resistance, and that will continue. And in a sense, it's true. The history of relations between Hamas and Israel is a history of assassinating one leader after another and then being replaced. Clearly, at this moment, in the midst of this grinding war between Israel and Hamas, which is spread across the region, the assassination of Yahya Sinwar is very, very significant. He held absolute control over both the political and the military wing. And there's been some discussion as to whether or not Hamas will actually reveal who will replace him, because they saw what happened in Lebanon after the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, the leader. The person expected to replace him was killed, and the person who was third in line was also killed by Israel. So they may wait, but they will quickly have someone in line to take over the military command, insofar as that command and control still exists, and also the political wing, because the people, the mediators who speak, the Qataris, the Egyptians, indirectly the Americans, need someone to speak with if the ceasefire talks and bringing the hostages home is on the agenda again.
Yes, who would negotiate on behalf of Hamas if those talks properly get going again, as you say? Our former BBC colleague Jim Muir spoke to BBC Radio earlier today and said that Benjamin Netanyahu is in full war mode. Do you agree with that? And what does that mean for what happens next?
You get a sense that with every week, and you have it on this program, Anita, another red line is crossed. Every week there is an event, which before this all happened would have been an extraordinary moment. But every week we have another extraordinary moment. And yes, Israel feels the wind is in its sails. Prime Minister Netanyahu feels he's been vindicated. That, for example, to take one example, the international community, most of all, his most important ally, the United States, says, don't go into Rafah. Don't go into the southernmost tip of the Gaza Strip. There will be huge humanitarian consequences. He ignored them, and in Rafah is where they finally got Yahya Sinwar. He believes that he is on the right course, and while there's a meeting today to discuss the fate of the hostages, but he believes that now is the time. I have a window. No one in the midst of an American election campaign is going to stop us. Let us do what we have always wanted to do. We've had so many tactical successes, spectacular tactical successes. We're just going to keep going.
I spoke to the brother-in-law of one of the hostages a little earlier this hour, and he was saying that it's time for Israel to accept that whatever total victory is, this is as close as it is going to get, and therefore the focus must be on getting those hostages who remain alive out and back to their families. What do you think all of this means for those hostages? What do you think it means for the people who are in a humanitarian crisis in Gaza?
Well, let's take the hostages first, the families of the hostages. It is agonizing for them. Weeks and weeks, months and months, they have been taking to the streets calling for a ceasefire. We already know, Anita, that senior commanders in the Israeli Defense Forces, including the Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, have been saying for months now that Israel has achieved all it could militarily in Gaza, that now was the time to cut a deal to try to bring the hostages home. It was always felt that the fact that they didn't get Yahya Sinwar, regarded as the mastermind of the October 7th attacks, was always one of the obstacles. Well, now that obstacle is over. But what has happened in recent weeks is Prime Minister Netanyahu, in the midst of this pressure to reach a deal in Gaza, has shifted the focus to Lebanon, and also to the widely expected retaliation that Israel is expected to carry out against Iran. So they are moving on all fronts. There will be more pressure on him. We'll see what they decide, but there is a growing sense that he will feel, no, I'm just going to press on. There's only a few more weeks before the American election. Let's just continue to protect Israel as best we can, even though there are many who are saying that now is the time to put other priorities first.
And on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza,
yes.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, as you've just pointed out, that sometimes the US has directly appealed to Benjamin Netanyahu. He's ignored that. When the USA said a couple of days ago, you've got 30 days to get more aid into Gaza, otherwise we cut off some military supplies, there was a response. We don't know exactly how much aid was in those 50 lorries that went in. But what does all of this mean then for the crisis, that the conditions of starvation that many people are living in there?
Well, many have pointed to the timing of this announcement, as significant as it is. 30 days on is after the American elections. It also gives Israel 30 days. 30 days, 1 day is a long time when people in Gaza are on the brink of starvation. What the UN agencies struggling to feed people in Gaza are saying, we need 500 trucks, we need at least 350 trucks. So 50 trucks is just a drop in the bucket. It's not enough. It's not going to feed the hundreds of thousands of hungry people in Gaza. And they include people, including in the north of Gaza, who are now basically under siege, who are encircled by Israeli forces. And even if you tried to get food in, you couldn't, because it is such an insecure situation. So yes, Israel says we are sending more food aid in, but the view on the ground is it's still not enough.
To pick up on some of the comments we heard in those vox pops from people in Gaza and in Jerusalem, a lot of them saying there's a moment now, there's an opportunity to try to bring an end to this. What would it take, do you think, for Benjamin Netanyahu to actually draw an end to this, from his perspective, from the Israeli government perspective?
Well, it was always said, both by the United States and Israel, that the main obstacle to a ceasefire deal was Yahya Sinwar. And he was known to be taking a hard line. He was known to be trying to widen this war to basically to amplify the Palestinian cause. Now that he's dead, the big question is, well, who takes over from him? We saw in the case of Lebanon, someone even more hardline was set to replace Hassan Nasrallah. It could be the case in Gaza, although we still don't know, as we discussed earlier, who that may be. But one of the obstacles was that Prime Minister Netanyahu refused to pull out all of the Israeli forces. And if he still holds to that, no one in Hamas, no one in the region could agree to that. Israeli troops have to leave, and that's what Arab states say. If you want us to try to work on the future of Gaza, you have to take out your troops.
And we're almost out of time. In a line, do you think that Hamas actually has the capacity to retaliate in any kind of significant way at this point?
They can send rockets. They have rockets, but they can't do a lot more.
OK, Lise, thank you very much for your thoughts on this continuing story today. Lise Doucette, our chief international correspondent. Now, moving to other news, and tributes continue. Sorry, we're going to come to that story in just a moment, but let's bring you another update on a story coming into us that is a heavily pregnant woman and her baby have died following a collision with an unmarked police car in southeast London. The incident happened in Eltham early on Thursday evening. It's unclear whether the police car was responding to an emergency at the time. The Metropolitan Police in London say this question will form part of its investigation. And a flight carrying Alex Salmond's coffin is on its way to Scotland after departing from North Macedonia in the past hour. Mr. Salmond's body was carried by 6 members of the North Macedonian military to the flight along a red carpet which was flanked by 8 other soldiers to the sound of a trumpet. Stay with us here on BBC News. Tributes continue to pour in after the death of Liam Payne, the former member of the boy band One Direction. Payne fell from a hotel balcony late on Wednesday in Buenos Aires. The singer rose to global stardom as part of One Direction, selling 70 million records worldwide. His former bandmates have paid tribute to him, saying the memories we shared will be treasured forever. Harry Styles said, "I am truly devastated by Liam's passing. His greatest joy was making other people happy, and it was an honour to be alongside him as he did it." From Louis Tomlinson, "Liam was somebody I looked up to every day, such a positive, funny and kind soul. I wish I got the chance to say goodbye and tell you one more time how much I loved you." And Zayn Malik said, "I lost a brother when you left us and can't explain to you what I'd give to just give you a hug one last time." Well, let's speak now to journalist James Gattaca Matheson, who's in Buenos Aires. James, hello to you. We spoke yesterday from outside the hotel where Liam Payne fell. I know you're very close to there now. We'll talk about reaction outside the hotel because lots of fans have been coming to pay tribute in just a moment. But first, I understand there are some new updates from the police.
Yes, exactly. There are some updates regarding the identification of the body. They are asking the family to come and recognize the body, although there were some comments that maybe his publicist was in town. That is not confirmed, but they're asking the family. Also, we got the report from the prosecutors yesterday that it was a latest official, and there are two takeaways very important. That due to the kind of injuries in his body, they determined that no one else was involved in the falling from the balcony of when Liam fell. And then the second thing is they think that he was partially or totally unconscious, and this is key because the next test, and probably what they're doing at the moment, is analyzing what kind of substance he was taking over the last hours on Wednesday, and to see what kind of issues he was having in terms of toxicology.
And tell us more about reaction from fans in the city, James.
Yeah, so it's a Friday. It's very early still, but yesterday I can tell that the number of fans was growing and growing by the hour. The number of candles, flowers, images, and people just reflecting on Liam's career, legacy as well, just outside the hotel. There's also, there was a small concentration as well at Buenos Aires obelisk, one of the landmarks in the city. Some directioners gather as well out there, and I can expect there's a number of demonstrations also coming over the weekend here in Buenos Aires.
Okay, James, thank you very much. James Gattaca Matheson in Buenos Aires. Now, King Charles and Queen Camilla have touched down in Australia for the first visit of a reigning British monarch to the country in 13 years. The royal couple arrived at Sydney Airport, greeted by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, Australia's Governor-General Sam Mostyn, as well as the Premier of the state of New South Wales, Chris Minns. And Sydney's Opera House displayed a photographic montage of King Charles' previous visits to Australia, where he attended school for 6 months as a teenager and has returned more than a dozen times to the country. The visit will last 6 days before the King and Queen travel to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting that is taking place in Samoa. And our news reporter Emer McCarthy joins us from Melbourne. So a rainy start to the visit there, Emer, and a welcome for the royal couple. But of course, many viewers will be well aware of the very active discussions in Australia about the future of the monarchy there. So tell us how this visit is being greeted overall.
Yeah, absolutely, Anita. As you said, a very wet and windy start to the visit, probably something that Charles and Camilla are quite used to. But as you said, this debate over the Republic in Australia, this isn't something new. Australians went to the polls back in 1999 for a referendum on the Republic, which was narrowly defeated. And Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister, has said in the past that he would be interested in having the Republic debate again and discussion around it. But it has gone very quiet over the past few years and few months. However, the Australian Republic Movement, which is the largest organisation of Republican voices in Australia, is billing this tour of the King and Queen as a farewell tour. They're even selling merchandise, hoping that this may actually be a bit of a push for Australians to see whether or not that King Charles and Camilla should be the head of state, Charles in particular, the head of state. So it is quite interesting, of course, as well. In the past few days, there's been really heated discussion about whether or not the premiers of 6 Australian states should attend a meeting. They're not going to attend a meeting with King Charles. So it will be an interesting few days for the Republican movement and for monarchists as well in Australia.
Emer, thank you very much. Emer McCarthy there in Melbourne. Stay with us here on BBC News. Much more coming up on the situation in the Middle East and President Biden's visit to Germany.
Hello there. This weekend sees the first named storm of the season. It's been named by the Irish Met Service. And at the moment, Storm Ashley is a long way away over the other side of the Atlantic and yet to develop from that area of cloud. In advance of that, we've got this deep low running to the northwest of the UK, pushing